Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Mouse,
And my name is Ayate.
and we are the hosts of Swan Shootout Radio, a podcast where we talk about niche Japanese video games. It's been a couple of months since our last episode. Life
Yeah.
has kept us busy, but I think we've got a good topic lined up today with Dragon Slayer 4, an old metroidvania from the 1980s, best known for the Famicom or NES release. It was localized as what did they call it? Legacy of the
Legacy of
Wizard.
Wizard. Yeah.
Right. But before we get into that, we'll have our little segment where we talk about what we've been up to lately. I guess over the past couple of months now.
hmm
So what have you been up to?
So for me, I've been kind of stuck in a rut lately when it comes to playing new games. So what I've been sticking to the most is playing Money Puzzle Exchanger. Like we had a episode dedicated to this game in the past, and I've been going pretty hard at it on Fightgate. So I've been playing a bunch of the versus mode against different people. And it's been a pretty fun time this past month, just grinding the game and really getting stronger at it. Um, Also, the community has been increasing slightly, but in very noticeable manner, and people have been improving too. And some people have even been discovering things about the games. Some member of the community Discord discovered some stuff in the debug mode on the emulator that got us to have a better understanding on the concept of A lines, which are the attack and defensive lines that you build in a versus match. And this person also managed to um, take out the patterns for each character and the neutral pattern. So we mentioned in the past episode dedicated to this game that it's not a proper randomized pattern. So ideally you can memorize it or just have an idea of what's going to be coming next. Although that is a pretty high level take on it because I'm not nearly good enough to really prepare myself based on memorizing the neutral pattern, but it's still a pretty good resource. And also one of our community members translated a guide made by a Japanese player named Sol, which goes to explain a lot of the chain mechanics and optimal ways of playing through the solo mode so you can score higher. And it has been pretty interesting information to get, especially since I didn't even know this guide existed in the first place, and some of the already strong players did know. So it has been serving me quite well in just making me chain better than ever. And so yeah, it's been I've been mostly sticking to this game like 100%, and so yeah, I don't
Sounds
think
like
I've.
it's getting closer to the point where everyone's just going to be counterstopping.
Well, I think that's still a long ways ahead. For me,
Yeah.
I'm still stuck on I've been getting runs to like 40 minutes of length, which is kind of crazy, but my score is um just a little below 6 million. So I think I said this in our episode, but if I really want to have a chance at getting a counter stop, what I really need to do is to score big in the first 10 minutes of the game, because that's when you have a more leverage to work with, because then the game gets extremely fast and you can be doing this crazy 50 plus chains
hmm
with much freedom. So yeah, but yeah, ideally I think counter stop is not like the impossible thing that I used to think about. It looks very doable in the future for me. So I feel pretty excited about the game right now. And it's such a good game. I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, it's a ton of fun and it's so easy to pick up.
Yeah.
Very simple mechanics, but very
Well,
difficult
it might
to
be a little
master.
intimidating playing against strong players because the matches go so fast. But
In
yeah,
versus
like,
mode, yeah,
hmm
there's solo, and that's where the real
yeah, that's the real mode
scoring
of the game.
challenges.
I think every strong player agrees that solo mode is the true mode in this game. Yeah.
Do you want to hear about Metal Max Xeno?
Oh, sure. No, that's a game that has.
So I bought a PS4 recently, and I've only been playing a few games so far, but most of my attention has been on Metal Max Xeno because I'm a really big fan of the series, and I followed this game leading up to its release, and I was fairly optimistic for it. But the reputation was quite bad. So now that I've finally played it, I can kind of see why it has the reputation that it does. Although I went in with more measured expectations than most people who played it on release, and I feel like I enjoyed it for what it is. But it's definitely one of the weakest games in the Metal Max series. It lacks a lot of what the series usually excels in, things like world building and side quests, exploration. That's basically just not in Xeno at all. What this game is you move through a mostly linear path along a desert wasteland, picking up items along the way and reaching objective points that will advance the story. There are no towns, just a central base of operations where you can do your shopping and build tank parts and customize your tanks. Uh, Most of the outlaws are still optional, but they're just strewn around the overworld map rather than having a dungeon or a quest related to them. The main reason you want to actually do dungeons rather than fighting outlaws is to get experience toward your base's tech level. And the tech level is what determines what items you can make and how much you can upgrade them. So in order to make stronger tanks, you have to go through the dungeons and get these they're basically just bags of experience that increase your tech level. All the dungeons have to be explored without tanks and feature the same paced hallways and rooms. It gets very repetitive when you're going through the same assets over and over. The biggest focus of this title is on the New Game Plus experience. When you go into New Game Plus, you unlock higher difficulties. There are new outlaws that are only available on later laps, and more new items become available too. The enemy drop tables change to include more items and better items to facilitate playing on higher difficulties where the enemies have inflated stats, and you need to have higher and higher damage per turn in order to stay competitive. So the core of this game is just getting stronger, getting unique drops from outlaws, and constantly adjusting your tank builds. The customization is fantastic. The series has over the years been tweaking the system to make tank building more complex and offer more customization. At the end of the day, it kind of just boils down to setting yourself up in a position where you can just press A to win through every battle, but getting yourself in that position is kind of where the fun lies. The game actually displays your damage per turn, allowing you to easily see what's working in your tank builds and what's not. To me, it kind of feels like it reminds me a bit of the Disgaea series, in the sense that the game design is all centered around getting stronger and giving you lots of opportunities to get stronger and showing you exactly how much damage you're outputting. And I feel like this is probably going to appeal more to Disgaea fans than necessarily Metal Max fans, because a lot of those things that people come to expect and enjoy about the Metal Max series, like the side quests and the personality and all that, it's not here at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting to hear that this is more of a take on a character building or just tank building game on the Metal Max series. I'm not sure how much it will engage me personally, since these are what I come to expect from Metal Max are mostly the engaging boss fights against the outlaws and the exploration, as you said. But still, I will definitely give a chance to a fresh perspective on the series. And if they're really getting right this character building stuff, it will be interesting to see how a new installment in the franchise that would maybe fuse these different concepts.
Yeah,
something
I
new.
think the series has been building up to this point for a while.
Yeah.
Metal Max 3 was the first one to have New Game Plus, although in
Yeah.
that one it was just the same difficulty. Metal Max 2 Reloaded introduced higher difficulty levels, and I played Metal Max 2 Reloaded on New Game Plus quite a bit, so I get the appeal of going into New Game Plus and getting unique drops from Outlaws. A great thing about the Metal Max series is that they have a very large diversity of different items to find, and they often have really weird utility. So that min-maxing is enjoyable. I like it, but this game isn't definitely not one of the best in this series, and probably not something that you want to start with if you're new to Metal Max.
Yeah.
Something that I did appreciate is that there's a lot of references to the older games that longtime fans will pick up on. For example, in the very first Metal Max game, there was an outlaw called the Rommel Ghost, which was a tank that you could fight. And in this game, you can actually get the Rommel Ghost as a playable tank and drive around in it. So that stuff is pretty cool. But otherwise, it's very one-dimensional. And unless you like that one dimension, you're probably better off playing other games in the series that have more to offer in other areas.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, and it looks like a PS2 game.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen pictures of the new Metal Max games they keep announcing, and well, I can say it's not a charming look to have.
Xeno released on both the Vita and the PS4, but the PS4 version doesn't have any improvements at all. The draw distance is terrible. It's weird. But you know, they're doing what they can with the budget that they have. The series has never sold very well, so you know, it's something.
Yeah, and they still have stuff planned for the future, so I think we talked about it in the previous episode. But yeah, I think maybe it's in a bit of an experimental phase or something like that, but it's still promising to see what they can do in the future.
I do think they're trying to widen their audience somewhat, and they recently put out a game called Metal Dogs on Steam, which is like a roguelite action with randomly generated dungeons. It doesn't look like something I want to play particularly, but maybe it'll attract some new interest in this series. I'm not really sure. They're trying stuff, you know. So, shall we get into Dragon Slayer 4?
Sure. Right.
So, this was a Metroidvania developed by Falcom, originally for the MSX on July the 10th, 1987. The Famicom version released the following week on July the 17th, published by Namco. And later that year, an MSX2 version was released in October, which made some changes to the layout of the dungeon and moved some item positions around and so forth. In 1989, the game was localized and published by Broderbund. This version is identical to the Famicom. By the way, how do you feel about the term Metroidvania?
Well, I personally don't really mind since it kind of gets the job done, but I can see how some people might be turned off from terms like Metroidvania or Souls-like.
Yeah.
Personally, I have never really cared if those terms are used, as long as it makes a clear distinction.
Yeah, I think
So,
we generally know. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, when I think of Dragon Slayer, I mostly just think dungeon crawler before Metroidvania, but
sure,
I do think the Metroidvania works well.
I do think that there are some distinctions from other Metroidvanias, both of the time and what this genre has kind of evolved into in the modern era. But if we look at the history of the Dragon Slayer series, the first one was a top-down action RPG.
Yeah.
And the second game, Xanadu, shifted to a side perspective. The third title, Romancia, kind of simplified the RPG mechanics of the previous game. And by the time we get to Dragon Slayer 4, the concept had basically evolved into something more resembling Metroidvania. There's no experience points anymore. There's no leveling up. the emphasis is more on exploration and finding items, and these items will give you new abilities to traverse further in the dungeon and continue making progress. But at that time, in the mid to late 80s, Metroidvanias were still a relatively new genre, and I think Dragon Slayer 4 experiments in certain ways that make it feel distinct even today compared to what we're used to in Metroidvanias.
Yeah, I've played a bit of Xanadu actually, and when I started the game, I immediately just recalled Xanadu because both games start you in a sort of hub area, and then you just go underground into this massive cryptic dungeon. But that's just about where the comparisons start to get blurred, since the gameplay in both are pretty different. And yeah, I definitely can see Dragon Slayer on 4 veering more towards what is known more as a Metroidvania these days, rather than a pure dungeon crawler.
One of the most obvious unique aspects about Dragon Slayer 4 is the use of 5 different playable characters that you can switch between in order to explore different areas of the dungeon. Each character has differences in their jumping height, the range of their attacks, and the power of those attacks. Plus, they can each make use of different tools that you find within the dungeon. These characters make up a family. I think they're called the Drasle family in the Japanese title, but I think there's another name for them.
Yeah, they're called the Warson family. Warson, because Drasl.
I'm not sure.
Because they're not called the Drasl family, because Drasl stands for Dragon
Slayer.
Yeah. But yeah, they have a different name, Parcel or something like that.
So to quickly give some perspective of what the characters are like, or a profile of each character. First, we have the father. His name is Zem. Zem has but very high attack power with mediocre range. He is the only character who can use the glove, which is a tool that allows him to push blocks. Is needed. These puzzles are not super complex, but they'll require you to stop and think for a minute, which gives the game a little bit more of a puzzle platformer underlying feel to it.
Yeah, it takes a bit to get the hang of the mobbing blocks, but you can restart the areas anyway, so you can just practice a bit until you really get the hang of it.
The next character is the mother, named Mayna. Her jump, attack power, and range are all fairly average. However, she can exclusively use 3 very important tools. One is the hit rod, which sends blocks bouncing back and forth across the screen. She can use the key stick, which allows you to open locked doors by spending MP instead of keys. And she can use the wings, which allow her to float over long distances, such as spikes or a large gap. And you can already see how the core of this game is collecting items and switching between characters who can make use of those. Next character is the son, named Roas. He's a fairly unremarkable character with average jump, low attack power, but long range. He's really only useful in the end game after you've defeated 4 major bosses with the other characters, because at that point he's able to use warp points that are spread throughout the dungeon, and you need to use these warp points to find the Dragon Slayer sword, which only Roas can use to defeat the final boss. In the MSX2 version, which was released after the original, some warp points can be used after defeating only 1 or 2 bosses, making Roas more useful in the mid-game for finding some items. I guess after the original, they realized that there's no real point in using him until after you've basically finished the game. Next, we have the daughter, named Lil. Lil has the highest jumping ability of any character, and the longest range as well, although her attack power is quite low. she can make use of the mattock, which is a pickaxe-like item that can destroy certain breakable blocks. And she can also use the jump shoes, which allow her to jump even higher than she already can, leading to some really ridiculous multi-screen jumps. And it's kind of interesting around that time when a lot of developers were experimenting with how to design Metroidvania levels and block off content until you've gotten certain items and so forth. And a number of developers just thought, well, we'll make it so you have to jump insanely high. And Dragon Slayer 4 certainly has that, and Esper Bokentai is an even more extreme example of that, where you can jump like 5 screens high in a single jump.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Finally, the last playable character is the pet named Pochi. Pochi has very low jump height and range, but high attack power. There are no items that Pochi can exclusively use. However, he has the unique ability of being immune to attacks from monsters in the dungeon. This makes Pochi an ideal character to start with, since you can dip your toes into the dungeon, get a sense of your surroundings, and start exploring and picking up a few items without fear of dying from touching the monsters.
Yeah, it's pretty cool that we have all these different characters with different abilities, and we also get this character that serves as scouting the dungeon. So yeah, so you can explore at your own pace.
And Pochi's immunity to damage from monsters is especially useful because of a very weird mechanic in this game where you can actually climb on top of monsters and jump off of them. It actually kind of seems like a bug when you first encounter it, but it's definitely intentional, and any character can do this, but it's most useful for Pochi because he's immune when he's climbing and jumping off monsters. And you can use this technique to reach some areas that would otherwise be very difficult to reach, and it helps to make up for Pochi's poor innate jump height, since he can just climb on top of monsters and jump off them. So that's basically the family, and as you go through the game, you'll need to jump. Well, so at the beginning, you start above the dungeon in a house that the characters live in, and basically you go down into the dungeon, pick up some items, and either warp out or climb back out to switch characters. Each character has a unique section that is basically dedicated to them, and when you enter their area, you'll notice that the music changes to sort of signify that that's exclusive to a particular character. And within each of those separate areas, you'll eventually find a boss. And the goal is basically take out 4 bosses so that you can unlock the warping ability for Roas, then collect the Dragon Slayer, and then beat the final boss. But doing this is much easier said than done, because the dungeon is very large, features a lot of puzzles, and what do you call them? Like false walls. A lot of trickery that makes it quite difficult to get through.
Yeah, this is definitely the kind of game I would have loved to play as a kid, because back then I used to love games like Legend of Zelda that really encourage exploring and just sharing tips among friends or whatever. Or just like talk about which part of the dungeon did you venture in and stuff like that. So yeah, it's.
I think one distinct point about Dragon Slayer 4 that helps kind of make up for how large and cryptic the dungeon is. Although you can acquire, I think, almost every item from chests by finding them throughout the dungeon, you can also purchase these items from shops that are hidden. Throughout the dungeon, you'll find both shops and inns where you can rest and restore your health and your magic. And using money that's dropped by enemies or found in chests, you can purchase items from shops, and each shop sells different items. So it basically gives players an alternative way to acquire items that you need to complete the game. Despite the dungeon being so large and complex, even if you're struggling to find every item in the chests, you still have this alternative option to buy them, which offers more flexibility and I think makes the progression more non-linear than it otherwise would be.
Yeah.
And for me, this is something I find especially attractive about this game in comparison to other Metroidvanias, because I feel like a lot of these games sort of copied the Super Metroid formula, where you have an illusion of exploration and non-linearity, although in reality you're being guided along a very specific progression from one item to the next, gradually opening up more of the map. But with Dragon Slayer 4, you have a true non-linear experience with multiple ways to acquire items and make progress, with less chance that you're going to get stuck looking for that one particular item you need to proceed. So each time you enter the dungeon, you should have something new to explore or a new tool to try out, making the adventure feel more personalized based on the paths that you took and the actions that you've made to make progress. Did you kind of get that sense when you're playing it recently?
Yeah, I definitely got the sense that this was a bit more, how to say this? Well, like you say, a bit more personalized, and that it really,
I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Just the words not coming out. But yeah, I definitely get the sense that this does Metroidvania in an interesting sense, and that maybe the Metroidvania formula has been just following it a very strict sense, while games could benefit more from this sense of freedom that Dragon Slayer gives to the player. So yeah, and I definitely love the idea between switching characters, exploring the dungeon, and coming back to just and get your password, and then continue exploring with a different character based on your findings.
I recall a couple of years ago, I saw a playthrough of somebody trying to beat the game using only one character. They chose Lil, who has the high jump and the ability to destroy certain blocks. And with her skills, she can kind of get away with getting through some of the other characters' areas, although it's much more difficult. So that kind of freedom and
I did find out that there's a bug in this game that's boss jumping.
Oh yeah,
done a lot by speedrunners of this game, where you can basically jump. Boss as you are jumping, so you can jump infinitely.
Yep. Yeah, you can use that to break the game pretty easily and bypass certain sections.
I'm not sure if this will make the daughter viable to just use her to beat the game, but it really seems like a game-breaking mechanic to me, especially if you're doing speedruns.
If nothing else, it helps if you're stuck. I think in my first playthrough, I used it because I messed up. I messed up by like doing the bosses in order that I probably shouldn't have, and I just couldn't beat one of the bosses. So I switched to a different character and used that glitch to beat him. So Dragon Slayer 4, it requires a lot of patience, and you should definitely not expect to finish it in one sitting on your first playthrough.
Or even without a guide or something, just some knowledge about the game beforehand.
At the very least, you should know that you should start with Pochi, because if you start with the other characters, it's going to be very hard to get a sense of your surroundings. It's considered to be a very challenging game, but not because it demands fast reflexes or great strategy or anything. it's just because it drops you off in a very complex dungeon without any guidance, without any hand-holding, and so you need patience more than skill. But it feels very rewarding as you're gradually exploring deeper into the dungeon. You're picking up those items that you had maybe found before, but didn't know how to actually get to them. It's just a good non-linear old school Metroidvania experience.
Yeah, I wonder how fans of newer Metroidvanias will feel about this game, since as good as it is, and surely a classic, I feel like it's not that much talked about in modern areas of the internet. Like, I don't really see that much people talk about it, even when Metroidvanias are so popular. Like, you see games like Hollow Knight or La Mulana be very popular among people, and I would love to see what fans of those games will think about this game.
I think that's partly because this Metroidvania genre has become so formulaic.
Yeah.
That the games that are like Super Metroid, even back on the NES, I think Euphoria, the Saga, or Hebereke is maybe a better example of a modern style Metroidvania. But I think there's something to be said about the unique experimental era back in the mid to late 80s, which Dragon Slayer 4 certainly fits into. They're different, if nothing else. Yeah. And for me personally, I really appreciate the non-linearity and the freedom that it offers.
Mm-hmm.
So between the different versions, I think the NES is probably perfect for a first playthrough. The MSX and MSX2 versions do not have smooth scrolling, while the NES has horizontal scrolling. This aspect may actually be an advantage to the MSX versions because it makes it much more easy to map out the dungeon. Because there isn't scrolling, you can very easily pinpoint your coordinates, and you can say, for example, that you saw a chest on coordinate C4 and you can only access it from the screen below you. But on the NES, it's a bit harder to keep track of exactly where you are when the screen scrolls smoothly.
Mm-hmm.
However, the excuse me, the original MSX version doesn't look very good. It has single color sprites. It's kind of choppy. And the changes that they made in the MSX2 version are probably best experienced on a second playthrough. Basically, what they did is they redesigned Lil's section of the game, the character who can jump very high. And as I mentioned earlier, they made it so that you can warp around with Roas much earlier after beating only one or two bosses. It's not so different as to dramatically change the game, but I think it offers a bit of a remix experience that may be engaging for players who enjoyed the original and want to re-experience the game with something new to change it up.
Yeah.
And I think that's about all I had to cover on Dragon Slayer 4.
Yeah, I feel like it's a bit hard to go super in depth when the game is more about just playing it and getting lost in this massive dungeon.
Because it's very much an exploration-based experience. It's not a mechanically dense game.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's to its strength. It's something that you can kind of zone out to, and just the simple joy of exploring is very prominent here.
And it still has a lot of personality in the mechanics that it has among the different characters. So it's still a pretty good package.
For me personally, I think this is one of the best Metroidvanias on the NES, along with Metroid and Hebereke. Mm-hmm. So if that sounds like your thing, then I highly recommend checking it out.
Yeah.
And I think we can more or less wrap up this episode.
Yeah, I think
So thanks everybody for tuning in. Hopefully next episode doesn't take quite so long.
Yeah.
But
Well, we
until
still have
then,
a lot of topics to cover with, but
mhm,
yeah, I hope everything was well. And thanks everyone for listening.
we'll see you next time. Take care.
See you. Take care.